Amen. As we finish up on the book of Esther, there were two principal character traits that were dominant in this whole book. What were those two character traits that we saw, one in Esther and one in Haman, that were very dominant? Anyone? Humility and pride. Now, this is something that obviously we all have to apply to our own lives. I'm not a person who's a social media fanatic. I don't get on Facebook at all. And for some reason, I just started getting on Twitter. And I'm not sure if God directed me there or not, but there is a tweet on there by the head basketball coach from Western Michigan University. And I'd just like to share this tweet with you. Talent is God-given, be humble. Fame is man-given, be grateful. Conceit is self-given, be careful. Now, this is the head basketball coach at Western Michigan University, so obviously his principal audience are probably going to be a lot of his students at Western, basketball players, other coaches within the MAC league. But this same tweet, or the same content of this tweet, applies to our lives. If we were to go back to Proverbs chapter 16, verse 8, this is what we have there. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And basically the tweet of Steve Hawkins, the head basketball coach at Western Michigan, is cautioning us against this. Whether he knew it was scriptural or not, that he was, what these words were, they were wise words that he was sharing with, what we should be sharing here in the church, he's sharing with his basketball players, fellow coaches, and so on. There was a second tweet on there by Jeff Christopherson. He's an author, and he writes the following. However noble our end, if the means employed for that end lack the same nobility, the desired prize will inevitably be undone and ruined. And here's the key. Light cannot come through dark means. Do you think that both of these tweets, even though they are not related to the book of Esther, are related to the book of Esther? You think of the first tweet by Steve Hawkins, and we talk about Esther and Haman. Which of the two were humble? Esther or Haman? Esther. Now, Haman, obviously, being the other, prideful, what happened to Haman? He had a great fall. Yep. He was arrogant. His arrogance was the source of his fall. Just like Scripture says, just like the tweet says. So we have to be cautious in what we do. We don't do things for how we appear to other people. We do things based on God's direction and God's guidance. So when Haman, what was the act that Haman was trying to do that because of his pride was overcome? What did Haman get put into place that was really the whole basis of the book of Esther? What did Haman want to do with the Jews? Wanted to destroy all of the Jews. And so his act, in his eyes, was noble. Just like this tweet said, it was noble. And in the process of doing that, his method of doing that turned out to be the downfall of that law. And we'll get more into that today in the verses. So when we go through these things and we read the verses in Esther, we have to make sure that we apply these things to our daily lives. Now, what I like to do is give you a little question as a thought starter, and I want you to think about it. Are there laws in your township, city, county, state, or country that you do not like? If so, what can you as an individual do to initiate change? Now, this could even be a homeowners association. Is there a rule that the homeowners association has that you don't like? The important thing here is, if there is something like that, what can you do, each and every one of you as an individual, to make change take place? Okay, speak up. What else? How many people here are pro-life? Raise your hand. Pro-life. Have you been following the news of what happened in Ireland? You have a country that's, what I think they said the percentage was 70% Catholic, and they just voted down a law that's been in place since the 1980s that prohibited abortion. So you have something there now where you have a compromise or a change in direction to where a belief of an entire denomination has been placed aside, and the progressive feelings of the people have moved to the forefront, and now life doesn't have the same value that it had the day before the election. So it was against the law to perform an abortion in Ireland. Once the law passed, that immediately changed. So again, you have that negative side instituting or getting change taking place, and in this case, not for the better. And we have a situation where there might be a law in this country, a law in this state, a law in this county, a law in this township, a law in my homeowners association, or wherever it may be, that I don't agree with. And so we have one suggestion: speak up. So do we, as a Christian body, speak up? Or because of our position, or because we don't want to get into any kind of argument, we remain silent? We had a parade in Trenton, a little small Memorial Day parade in Trenton, and there was a group of Right to Life of Michigan that marched in the parade. So this group has a law that abortion is still legal. They are taking action. They are speaking up, saying we are pro-life, not pro-choice, not pro-abortion, but we are pro-life. And they are taking action in order to institute change. In the book of Esther, was there something in place that Mordecai and Esther did not agree with? And what was that again? Kill the Jews. Jews had no value in Persia, no value whatsoever. And also, on the other, as well, along with that, women had basically no place in the Persian culture. Yet you had two individuals, Mordecai and Esther, who were not willing to stand and be silent, but they were willing to accept the call that God had placed on their lives and move forward and begin to institute change. Does anybody have a definition for the word missionary? What would be a definition that you might give for the word missionary? One who is sent, and sent by God. What's the name of our church? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What is it? Lakeside what? Missionary Baptist Church. So, what are you? And a missionary. Troy? Everyone? Missionaries, missionaries, missionaries. So, each and every one of us is a missionary. Years ago, I spoke at a church in Wyandotte for the Gideons, and as I'm standing like I am today, I looked up, and they had the clock, but right below the clock, and it says, as you pass through these doors, you are entering into your mission field. You may have, other church may have done this, but it was the first time I ever saw it. That should be on all of our doors here. As we pass through these doors, we are entering into our mission field. It's not just a name. We're not just Lakeside Missionary Baptist Church. By name, we are missionaries. And every one of you is a missionary. You may be a missionary in a different way. You don't have to go to a foreign land to be a missionary. Did Mordecai have to go to another? They were already prisoners, so I'll probably be careful on how I word that. They were in a foreign land because they were prisoners in Persia, but they were trying to institute a land in which they are now living, at least. I don't know if Mordecai and Esther ever really thought about it. Says, boy, it's tough being a missionary. I don't think they ever thought about it that way, even though they were. And so they had a call that was placed on them. There was something that was not just in Persia, and they chose to accept that call as missionaries and to do something to institute change. And so when you have something that you don't agree with and you want to institute change, there's something you have to do. It's not somebody else. Now, here's something that happens quite often. Troy, the Lord's placed it on my heart that you need to serve in the children's ministry. What's wrong with that statement? Exactly right. When God places a call on you, it's not up to you to go find somebody else to do it. God has already said, I've identified you for the call. So let me ask you this. Did Esther go looking for someone else? She wasn't too keen on it for a while. She had to be nudged along the way every once in a while, as we find in chapter 4, verse 14. But she did continue through with her field. But when God places something on your heart, a call on your heart to do something, some work that God wants to work through you, He's not asking you to go find someone else. He's already found who He wants. It's you. And so that's a very common thing. You'll see that all the time in churches. And Troy's answer was right spot on, 100% correct. Whosever heart the burden is, I have a burden for the youth. Guess what? That's a call. Get involved with the youth. Don't go looking for someone else to work with the youth. You do it. Now, are we all missionaries? Are we all missionaries? We are. Every one of us in a different way has their own mission field. Every day I went to work, I looked at going to work and stepping into my job at the high school as a mission field. People would sit there and they would tell you sometimes, they'll say, how could you ever work at that high school? It's really got to be a rough high school. How could you have worked there? It's my mission field. There would be days where I'd be in my classroom praying with the head custodian of the high school. There was a health occupations teacher that we would be together and we would go between the two classrooms and pray in specific desks for individual students who had a real need. A lot of times you'll have students who are very disruptive. We have a couple choices, get rid of them or pray for them. And we chose to keep them in the class and pray for them specifically in the morning to start the day out. Now, that's not our idea. That was the teacher of the year who did that many years ago, and we were just following that individual's example. That's not something we thought up of. But that's a mission field. Your neighborhoods are mission fields. The places you work, the people you have contact with on a daily basis, these are all your mission fields. And so in this particular case, and these are all things that came, excuse me, from the book of Esther. Esther had that mission field in front of her, and we looked at everything at work. We saw pride at work. We saw humility at work. And in the long run, humility won. Pride was a source of destruction. Okay? When Esther first started out, was she really excited about doing what she did? Esther, you're going to save millions of Jews today, but you're going to have to go before a ruthless king who, at the drop of a hat, may kill you. Sounding pretty good so far? She didn't want any part of that. But as she continues to follow God's command and continues to work through each and every step along the way, and she humbly accepted the advice of others. One of the first pieces of advice that she was given was, do not let them know that you're a Jew. And that came from Mordecai. Now, Mordecai was in a position to where he knew what was going on. He knew of the need of a new queen, and he was able to bring Esther in to be considered as a possible candidate to be the new queen. So as they continue in their mission field, God is directing them and guiding them through the way. Now, at any point along the way, was there doubt in Esther's mind of going ahead with what she was called to do? Yes. There was a point where Mordecai had to give her a little pep talk, had to kind of lift her up a little bit and encourage her to move forward. And even said at that point, says, well, if you choose to remain silent and not to carry through with this responsibility, God is still there. God will carry us through and resolve the situation we have. And at that point, what Esther was simply saying is, well, I'll go in. What could he do? Kill me? And after she realizes that, well, if I don't get this resolved, as a Jew, I'll be dead anyway. So there's no choice. I will move ahead and continue to do that. So we find that pride and that humility, I should say, not pride, that humility was what continued to move her forward. If you have your books, if you could turn to page 150, or if you don't have, excuse me, if you don't have your books, Esther chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. Now remember, at this point, Haman has already been killed, but we still have in place the law that was going to kill all the Jews. So Haman is now out of the picture. And when we start with verse 1 in chapter 8, we are at a point now after Haman's death and what's going to happen next. On that day that the king Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. So everything that Haman owned was given over to Esther. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told that he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Get all of these riches, to be in a position of authority, were now being given over to the queen, and then the queen in turn passed them on over to Mordecai. How do you think Mordecai and Esther felt at this point? Did they feel pretty safe, pretty secure? Would you think that they felt like they've accomplished something? Would it be easy for them just to sit back and ride along with the successes that they've had at this point? Probably would have been. You think about everything up to this point was really about themselves. Esther was concerned about her death. You know, if I went to the king and he didn't accept me, he would kill me. Everything was about I. And so what we read here right now would be what would have been really easy for both of them to do is to continue with the I and not move any further along. What was the mission that they were sent to do? To reverse the law that was going to kill all the Jews. So even though they have accomplished a lot, Haman's gone, they're in the positions of authority, they have the signet ring, which represents a lot of authority. So what we have to hope for in this case is an attitude change. Because up to this point, everything's been about I. It's been about Mordecai, it's been about Esther. They still haven't gotten to talking about all the Jews. And that's the reason why they are really there. That was their mission field. That was their goal, what they were sent to do. But it would have been really easy for them to stop right there and not go any further. Now, from the end of verse 2 to the beginning of verse 3, there's about a 2-month period of time. So even though it's verse 3, there's still a large period of time in between the two verses. So if on page 151, down at the bottom, we have verse 3. Esther spoke again before the king and fell down at his feet. You notice how she's still remaining humble? And besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman, the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jew. Now this device was the law that would kill all the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king. There's an attitude change here. Within this 2-month period, there's been a lot of thinking going on. They have all the properties of Haman. They have all the authorities that Haman once had. They could have felt pretty safe in their position. They probably knew that they were not going to be killed, even if they were to follow through with all the law. But now there's an attitude change. Over this 2 months, there's an attitude change from thinking about I, and now they're thinking about everyone else. And so what you're having is Esther presenting or beginning to step forward now and present the position based on the need of all the people, not just her need or not just the need of Malachi. And when we think about how we serve God, is serving God about us? We have an attitude. We have a couple choices: selfish or selfless. Which one is God? Selfless. And so when you're called to serve God, when you are on your mission field, it's all about someone else. It's not about us. So as we continue to carry through the call that we all have, we go out into the mission field with a selfless spirit, one that will reach out to others and not focus on us. When we come into this auditorium on Sunday mornings at 11 o'clock in the morning, what is this time all about? Is it about us? Who's it about? It's about God. It's worship to God, not to us. We're not here to be entertained. We're not here to have our ears tickled. We're here to worship God. And so that's why it's important to our focus always be outward, not inward. Instead of being selfish, we should be selfless in what we do. So in this 2-month period of time, we're seeing an attitude change from I'm not going to call her selfish because she's doing a lot so far. But the focus was no longer on Esther. Her focus was now outward on the rest of the Jewish population that was captive in Persia. Okay? Let's go to page 152. And said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letter devised by Haman, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all of the king's providences. For now can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto, and underline these words, my people. What just happened? What happened for the first time by Esther? What did she admit to? Jewish. She admitted to being a Jew before the king. She referred to him as my people. Now, obviously, the king was very aware of the law that was going to destroy all the Jews. And so when she's asking for this law to be reversed, and she refers to him as my people, that puts her in the same boat as the rest of the Jews. And then you continue on. Or how can I endure to see the destruction, and again, underline this, my kindred? Again, she's reiterating again, reinforcing again that they are my people. I am like they are. I am a Jew. Verse 7, then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther, the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hung upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye there also for the Jews, as it is like you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. Everything that had been done before was just reversed in this time. So the law was passed that would kill all the Jews. That couldn't be reversed. The ring, that signet ring, was given over, taken from Haman, given over, and Mordecai had that, had the authority that went with it. A new law was passed, and that same signet ring that sealed the law to kill the Jews now was sealing the ring. That ring was sealing a law that would save the Jews. It's a very obvious change in attitude from focusing on I to where now Esther is focusing outward on all the other Jews that were present. As I said earlier, it would have been very easy for both her and Mordecai just to sit back and basically live on the successes that they've already had. But God had called them for something else. And they had to continue to move forward with that. And so what they did is they continued to move forward, and this time the focus was on saving the rest of the Jews, not just themselves. Okay? So in us, there has to be an attitude change. There has to be an attitude change in ourselves, that our focus is, again, not on us, but our focus is always outward as we go into our mission field. Turn to page 154, and we have the last three verses that we're going to be studying from, and this is Esther 9, verses 20 through 22. Now the law had been reversed. All the Jews had been saved. The mission that Mordecai and Esther had been called to carry out has been finalized. But there's something they want to make sure that never happens again. They want to make sure that the people remember the events of the past. And so as we read verses 20 through 22, we're going to find out what they choose to do to remember what just happened. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces, both nigh and afar, to establish among them that they would keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies. So even though they were captives in Persia, once this decree was passed and they were saved, they looked at themselves no longer as captives. They rested from their enemies, so they no longer looked at the Persians as enemies. In that month it was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, so they went from being unhappy to happy, and from mourning into a good day. And they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. And the last thing I want you to underline is, and gifts to the poor. Why do we study? I'm going to guess everyone has taken a history class. And usually if you're a typical student, you'll say, why do I have to study this or know this? But why do we study history? To learn what? There you go. Past mistakes and not repeat them. But also there's a positive side to it as well. We don't want to repeat the mistakes, but what do we also want to do? Learn from the successes. So we study from history. And what they're doing here is basically reminding the people, don't forget. Don't forget what happened. Don't forget where you were. You know, a lot of times we start taking things for granted. I mean, I think in the United States many times some of the freedoms we have we take for granted. And then all you have to do is physically go to some other country for a short period of time and see what they don't have. And then you come back here and you become more and more thankful for what we do have. But you think of the things of the past and what have taken from the past, and we try to repeat the positive and never repeat the negatives that took place in the past. And basically what's going on here is a reminder to always look to the past and learn from that. And they end the phrase with, and gifts to the poor. What were they really trying to say to all the Jews? Don't forget about everybody else. Just as Mordecai and Esther could have stopped at their own successes and forgot about the rest of the people, they chose to focus outward and reach out to the rest of the people. Just as the last phrase says here, gifts to the poor, they remind us, don't forget about all the captivity that you were in, all the persecution you were in, but we no longer have. Continue to reach out to other people. Now, this applies a lot to our service in ministries. As missionaries, we're called to serve. Now, are you being called to serve for recognition? I mean, are you doing things so other people will see you and give you a pat on the back? No. If you're serving to get a pat on the back or rewards, you're serving for the wrong reason. God calls us to do extraordinary things in the simplest responsibilities. Whatever he calls you do, you do to the best of your ability. I want to read I found this on the internet, and it was a very good illustration of how we do things on a daily basis with little or no recognition until finally we no longer do it, and then it gets recognized. So if I have some time, I'll read this. One afternoon, a man came home from work to find total mayhem in his house. His 3 children were outside, still in their pajamas, playing in the mud with empty food boxes and wrappers thrown all over the front yard. The door of his wife's car was open, as was the front door of the house. Proceeding into the entrance, he found an even bigger mess. A lamp had been knocked over, and the throw rug was wadded up against the wall. In the front room, the TV was loudly blaring a cartoon channel, and the family room was strewn with toys and various items of clothing. In the kitchen, dishes filled the sink. Breakfast food was spilled on the counter. Dog food was spilled on the floor. A broken glass laid under the table. A small pile of sand was spread by the back door. He quickly headed up the stairs, stepping over toys and more piles of clothes, looking for his wife. He was worried that she may be ill or something serious had happened. He found her lounging in the bedroom, still curled up in the bed in her pajamas, reading a novel. She looked up at him, smiled, and asked how his day went. He looked at her bewildered and asked, "What happened here?" She smiled again and answered, "You know, every day when you come home from work and you ask me, 'What in the world did you do today?' "Yes," he replied in bewilderment. She answered, "Well, today I didn't do it." Every day, people are carrying out their mission field with little or no recognition. And as in this example, this is a typical day's responsibility for a housewife who is responsible for the maintenance of the biggest project you could possibly think of maintaining the kids in the household and so on. But if you are out there for recognition, you're doing it for the wrong reason. One thing that we want to make sure is that whatever mission we're called to do, that it's God doing the calling, that we're not doing it because of our own self. Again, remember pride and humility. If we're doing it for ourselves, that's a prideful act. God is not in it. If it's a call that God has placed upon your heart, that's a totally different thing. There will be times when, because you don't get any recognition, you get tired. But when God is in it, he gives you this is a scientific term, stickability. All right, I'm just making this up. Stickability. God gives you stickability when you're carrying out a call that's been placed upon your life. And that's your ability to continue to move forward in the most menial responsibility that God's called you to do, but God is in it. And they give you the stickability to be able to carry that out. So the book of Esther is so amazing. It's so full of material that we can apply to our own lives. And obviously our prayer this day would be that we would just continue to not just be studiers of the word or hearers of the word, but we will continue to apply these to our own lives. Any comments? I've been doing all the talking. Any comments at all? Okay. Any comments at all? Gene, would you close us in prayer, please? Close us in prayer.